I think the clouds are obviously becoming darker. And the reason I say that is clearly, I mean, even if you look at the NCAR and their predictions today, I mean, that's been pretty sad because, I mean, 23.9% was bad enough for the first quarter. But the prediction that the next 3 quarters will see decline and we'll probably have end up at a 12.6% GDP decline for the year is scary. What is even scarier is their projection that it may be 2035, 2036 by the time we're able to get back to a 7% growth. Now, the reason I'm saying scary is I still maintain the silver lining is there because, I mean, if you look at the Sensex and the Nifty, they're galloping heavily except for the occasional correction. And as my friend Lata in CNBC always says, I mean, the markets are a reflection of the futures of the country. But unfortunately also, the markets are a reflection of what large corporate sector will gain from. Don't forget the Sensex is the top 30 stocks. And do the top 30 stocks reflect the entire country of 130 crore people? Absolutely not. So we have to take all those provisos. So if you look at the economy, you look at the stock markets, there are enough silver linings. I mean, the IT sector, which I have been throughout my life, is doing phenomenally well. I mean, if you look at the results of TCS, Infosys, and recently the results of Accenture, albeit in the US, I think clearly the whole move towards digital is happening, which hopefully is also good news for Osama and Digital Empowerment Foundation. But I think digital is the way people will go. So that's a silver lining. And I'll come back to the concept of the $1 trillion Digital India later. And because there are a lot of opportunities there, which the government should, can, and will pursue, I'm sure. What is distressing, obviously, is apart from agriculture, which still grew 3% in the last quarter, thanks to a very good monsoon and crops. I think apart from that, if you look at the artisan community, for instance, which is the second largest employer in the country, they're in really, really bad shape because people are not buying. All discretionary purchasing has almost come to a standstill. So that's one huge employment sector. Similarly, textiles, similarly, garments, similarly, retail, barring some elements of food e-commerce. So I think they have a big problem. And the sooner we can get the Jahan back on track, the sooner we can get people to, albeit with some social distancing, masks, etc., to get back to work. And when I say work, not just work from home, which is fine for the IT sector, because you can't be in a productive economy and everybody working from home. So we'll have to make it safe enough for people to come back to their workplaces and get started, because this economy needs this productive economy to come back to work. So I think that's my proviso on the silver lining. Having said that, I think we are seeing, yesterday Mr. Kamath was talking about many, many sectors where things are coming back to near normal, maybe a little optimistic. But I would still think that, I mean, you look at the auto sector is coming back a little bit. It was already doing badly before the COVID. Manufacturing is still affected. Supply chains are still broken in various places. But I think the country is limping back. So the silver linings are there. How effectively we grab those silver linings and use them to dispel the clouds, I think that we'll see over the next maybe 4 to 6 weeks. And that will probably determine the future of the economy.
And what about the fact that there is a belief or there is an argument that there will be a V-shaped recovery? There has been a pandemic. There has been a problem which has happened across the globe. Across the globe, the economy is suffering. But it's just a matter of time. The moment, Corona flies away from our lands, economy will jump back and everything will be great again. And this is certain to happen. It is impossible that this will not happen. The so-called V. Yesterday we were producing 100 bags. Now we are producing 75. After V-shaped recovery, we will be producing at least 150. What do you say about that?
Well, that's too optimistic. I wish I could say that, but seeing is not a V. It's not, I hope it's not a W. As you know, a W would mean that there is a second dip.
Yeah.
It was, to an extent, the UK has been facing in the last couple of weeks. So is Spain, so is France. I was talking to my friend who lives in Holland. So he was saying that even in Amsterdam, for instance, has gone to 2,000 cases per day. So everybody is kind of looking at a minor second wave. But what we're seeing, at least today, and I hope it's not true, is what is called a K-shaped recovery, which means a couple of sectors beginning to recover. IT is one example I mentioned. But the rest of it is the bottom half to the K, which is sliding very, very fast. And going back to what I think Amir said, which is so true, our biggest problem is jobs. I mean, we have a real problem, of jobs, and a bigger problem than jobs is wages. Because you might still create enough jobs, but they'll all be in the informal economy. people getting some maybe 6,000, 6,500 per month, but the wages would have come down by 40%. So if somebody is feeding a family of 4, I mean, you're driving people into poverty. So when we look at the whole, the Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 1 and 2, which is both poverty and hunger, we are in very, very real danger that we have a 10-year cycle of more and more people into poverty and more people into hunger. And interestingly, the GDP that you mentioned, it's also a vicious cycle, because if production comes low, as you were saying, when you produce 24 bags less, it also kind of dispels the mood of the economy. People are already starting to buy much less. Nobody is going and buying fancy clothes or fancy shoes. Everybody is saving for the rainy day, and the rainy days look like they're going forever. So I think you have to have some defining feature which gets the economy to at least jump back a little bit. You have to get the mood of not the mood of the stock markets, but the mood of the real markets. As they say, high street rather than Wall Street. That has to come back. And slowly people have to have confidence that things are getting better. And that is really where, I don't see that happening at this point of time. But hopefully things will take shape. As I said, in the digital economy, there are opportunities. Maybe I'll talk about it a little later. But, we have to see the real economy bounce back sooner rather than later. And this is not going to get us anywhere if we don't improve.
What does one do about the very, very clear and evidence-backed risks that big tech platforms such as Google and Facebook have been posing to the functioning of a democracy? In fact, there seems to be increasing evidence that not only are Facebook and Google, it is not simply a matter of being addicted to social media. That is just one part of it. But Google and Facebook are creating an information bubble for everyone, where they only receive the nuggets of information that Facebook thinks X political force will be comfortable with, or Y political force would be comfortable with. And since I live in these bubbles now, since I live on Facebook, I live on YouTube, and I live on Google, and since I'm only getting facts which favor a certain political force or ideology. So if I have incorrect or incomplete information, then I keep mentioning this. Dr. Sen says that democracy has to be participative. Democracy cannot be participative if I don't even know what truth is or not, or is not, or what is important and what is not. We are hearing that Facebook now has tested. There are one of Facebook's co-founders, McGee, has written about it. So Facebook has tested on number of users whether if Facebook wants to make Dushyant angry today, can it achieve it? Facebook has done this experiment, and very successfully. And they had to it was a big scandal in the US. They had to apologize because they never took the consent of the people they experimented on. But they were successful. If I want this person to feel sad today, so and so to feel angry today, they can manage it. So now, how does the world deal with this? Because there are very few solutions coming across the world. Even big countries or more robust, more robust compared to Asia, certainly. More robust democracies like America are also struggling to answer this. Besides saying break big tech, क्या Facebook को छोटा कर दीजिए, but तोड़ दीजिए. How do we deal with this, and what can India do? What should India do, and what can the world do?
No, I have a slightly contrarian view on this, because people blame social media. Facebook is the easiest whipping boy for everybody.
Yeah.
People say you sided the other one will say no, you did. See, at the end of the day, there are some realities. For instance, in our country, the reality is that our Prime Minister is widely accepted as the best leader by a large majority of the people. So let's park that fact. Once you have that, then it's a question of who exploits that image and that dominance in what way, and that is arguable. Who uses Facebook better? Which political party uses it better? Who uses the television media? To my mind, except for one channel, I hardly ever watch television media, because every day you are listening to what Kangana Ranaut said or what Sunil Gavaskar should have done or which friend of Riya Chaturvedi is going to interrogation. I mean, the real issues of the economy, which are something that concerns many of us as thinking people. Okay, whether it's the economy itself, whether it's poverty, whether it is the need for creating rural and urban jobs, I mean, hardly finds any mention. So I'm saying you're starting with a position of very limited opposition. You're seeing it in the farmers' struggle going on right away, and then you're finding that some media. That's why I said whether it's television media or electronic media, social media, is actually being used, but don't blame it on them. I'm just saying we are a victim of what we want to believe. So if a fringe of people want to believe something, we will all hate social media. But
right.
A large group of people, as Osama rightly said, who treat abuse as a term of endearment nowadays, okay, they enjoy it. And you're seeing some television channels literally exploiting the fact that, it is divisiveness and hatred which gets you TRPs. So I'm saying if our society is kind of migrating in that direction, who can we blame? So we must introspect. My own feeling is that thinking people, all of us should do whatever it takes. You talked about Pune City Connect. I mean, Pune City Connect does phenomenal work, helped by DEF and so many others in digital literacy and skills for the entire community. I mean, we have used electronic, if you look at Google, for instance, from a Google Maps point of view, we know everyone in the 650 slum communities of Pune. Now, the minute you know everyone living in the 650 slum communities of Pune, there are two ways I can use it. When I was explaining this to my social venture partners board in Seattle, they were horrified. Saying, oh my God, what about the privacy of those people? We now obviously are using it to ensure that at least one member of the family is going to school, one member is skilling, one member is maybe being digitally literate. So we're using it for good. But we could also very easily on the flip side use it for the bad.
Yeah.
If you allow the bad elements to proliferate and control your data, there is very little you can do about it. But if you proliferate, like we call it Sampurna Pune, if Pune becomes Sampurna, India becomes Sampurna, and good people are going to use media to proliferate good thoughts. I know it sounds utopian, but I should be the future we have done. Just one point, Dushyant, on what you mentioned about the US elections. US election, the controversy is not about digital ballots. It's about postal ballots.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, the reality is all of us know is that President Trump is creating this whole platform by which tomorrow if Biden gets 280 votes in the electoral thing and he becomes president, and the Supreme Court is 6-3 in favor of the Republican Party, and you keep on bashing up the postal ballots, you have a case for which, who knows, the Supreme Court may overturn the election. So that's a different game being played there. So in India, I totally agree with what Amir said, that look, our only future is to go digital. It will eliminate biases. I grew up in a small village in Jharkhand near Ranchi. And I mean, I have not seen any election happening without little kids voting 15 times. I mean, that is the way elections used to run. So I'm saying digital is probably the best solution for countries like ours, where you won't worry about booth capturing and so many other phenomena that we've seen. And today, I totally agree with Amir. I mean, our own election process is much better. And whatever be the flaws, a good election still seems to come up with what is the popular sentiment of the time. So I'm saying everything is not bad. There are opportunities for us to use digital much more extensively. But if at all we blame anybody else, including social media, let's first look at ourselves. Look at what is happening in our country and what can we people who are listening to this chat or the people who are talking about it, what can we do? If our heart bleeds for India, it is our responsibility and our opportunity to do something for the country. I mean, which is why I'm such a fan of Osama, for instance. I mean, because he has relentlessly gone out and done good work for India and said, I mean, to hell with all the naysayers, I will do my bit. And if, let's say, 4 million people start doing their bit and create change agents across the country, I'm still hopeful that we can see a better India emerge.
You say that digital can create a 1 trillion economy. How likely is it? Do you sense that there is a recognition, like our Prime Minister says, we have to look for afsar in Apda, opportunity in difficult times. Do you think tech sees that opportunity? Number one. Number two, how likely does it look? What are the hurdles to it? Because I don't think there is any question of government regulation, government having to create some infrastructure for digital economy to do better. But how do you explain the this 1 trillion economy, digital economy thing?
Okay, I could answer you for 2 hours, so let me try and
Please.
get down to 5 minutes. But see, I think first look at the infrastructure requirements. Okay, I mean, it is not correct to say that government doesn't need to create infrastructure. The one problem we've always had is we first called it the National Optical Fiber Network, then we kind of got titled BharatNet. Recently, Prime Minister Modi in his Independence Day address talked again about NOFN, which is the National Optical Fiber Network. See, what is extremely critical for Digital India to happen is that basic infrastructure has to be there, which means that every one of 240,000 gram panchayats, 600,000 villages have to be connected with at least a modicum of good bandwidth and etc. So if that is there, then the question of where is Digital India? Because we all know about the $5 trillion overall GDP, supposed to be 2024, is not going to happen. And no fault of anybody. I mean, nobody expected COVID. You'll be lucky to see $5 trillion GDP in this country by 2030. Maybe I'm being a pessimist, but I mean, let's be realistic. But what is definitely possible is the $1 trillion digital economy, which is what out of the 5 trillion, can get created as early as 2025, 26. Why? Because one success story which we must never forget is what is colloquially called the Jam Trinity. So Jan Dhan Aadhaar mobility has been a great success story in this country. We may not be doing great on telecom and not yet on 4G, 5G, but certainly the whole mobile phone revolution has been amazing. And that's why even today, if you look at an entity like Pune City Connect, for instance, 95% of our children are still learning because they all have access to some device or the other, at least in the cities. But as I said, we need to take it to the villages. So if you take Jan Dhan and you take the whole what they call the India stack, okay, which is the entire stack of financial services, now you take that and apply it to healthcare, apply it to education, apply it to skills. Today, one of the biggest problems we have is that we've got migrant labor who have gone back. Now they're coming back, but there are no jobs. So the distribution of jobs in our country has just not happened. So if you want to distribute jobs, you have to move away from these large monolithic structures in the Delhis and Punes and Mumbais and say that, look, how do we create, like China has done very successfully. I mean, we have created hardly 2 vibrant new cities in the last 10 years. China has created probably 20, 30 of them. So creating those smart cities, creating smart villages, ensuring the jobs are available where people live and they don't have to move and crowd the urban locations because of that. That will need digital employment exchanges. It will need digital job. It will need informal companies, not irrelevant companies, but I'm saying informal, small companies which are in clusters all over the country. Even the artisan groups should be having clusters of, and I think DEF was trying to do that at some point of time. But if you look at Kutch, for instance, there's no reason why 50,000 artisans can't be working together with a full digital exchange. So I'm saying we have to reimagine the way digital is used to enable people to study, work, live in smaller parts of India. And once we reimagine that, and I'm sure there are enough smart brains in government, in the private sector who can make that happen, you'll see that happen. I mean, what is $1 trillion Digital India? The IT services industry and plus BPO will grow from maybe 160 billion to about 350 billion by 2025. The balance 650 billion will be IT enabled. And I'm not talking about call centers. I'm talking about services like this, which have IT at the core, but almost everything, e-agriculture,
e-health, food delivery.
Yeah, everything. And it's very possible. And as you rightly said, barring the basic plumbing, which is the digital infrastructure, government doesn't need to do anything. But are our entrepreneurs willing to collaborate and make that happen? I personally think that's a great role for Digital Empowerment Foundation to play, to really evangelize this cause and make each one of the 100 smart cities start doing something. And then each of the 100 smart cities becomes a hub for, let's say, 20 other locations. Now, suddenly you've got 2,000 locations all over the country, which are job creators. This is what we need. And I am very hopeful. In fact, I'm spending a lot of time with the Ministry of IT also in just talking about this concept, and maybe Osama, you and I should have a chat. But I think people who are like-minded, who want to manage this transition to a digital economy, need to do that. Whether it's digital elections or digital anything, let's try and see and make it happen.
Infrastructure that you speak of, it will. Do you think the government has the monetary resources to do it, or do you think that even that can be?
See, the good news is that there is one company which has the monetary resources to do it, and if that company is now given a free hand, which is surprising that I would say that. But maybe that's the solution. That if that one company lays out all the digital infrastructure, does quantum computing, does 5G, which is fully capable of doing, maybe we will all be riding on top of a one company digital ecosystem. But so what? At least if the applications can flower on that one big infrastructure, I'd be happy.